Okay. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We have a really great presentation for you today. I titled this presentation, Milk Does the Body Good? Question mark, to get your attention. Today we are talking about milk, breast milk. This presentation is an iteration of a class that I was invited to teach at Columbia University for students studying and pursuing a degree in social work. The presentation is actually entitled, as we can see, Infant Feeding Practices and Policies. This presentation will be a condensed version of that presentation for those students. So thank you for being here, and let's get started. So my name is Almitra Gasper. I have been certified as a lactation counselor. I have a baby, well, two, they're grown now, and I breastfed them exclusively. I was recognized by a woman at the WIC office that hired me and trained me to be a peer counselor. And then I got further training, hence the certification. I then spent 10 years supporting women in their choice to breastfeed and helping them reach their breastfeeding goals. I also have a Bachelor of Science in the sociology of urban conflict. Now, this is just the study and scrutiny of the systems, operations, and infrastructures that have resulted in the conflicts that arise and we experience in urban centers. So, these conflicts that I usually deal with, like deed theft or predatory lending, maternal mortality and breastfeeding rates for my sister, or even intimate partner violence and other forms of domestic violence in neighborhoods like street violence. So that is what I mean when I say I am an urban conflict specialist. I have actually spent more time working these issues than I have in school. So that's where my expertise comes from, being on the ground, working with individuals and groups that want and need the advocacy, the information, and the support, and the encouragement and hope, and all the things that I bring. And these institutions that act like they're interested or just need to be put on notice that I see you, there's a whole bunch of us that see what's going on out here. And I am here to help us dissect and dismantle the mess that we find ourselves in. This presentation is not a typical presentation on breastfeeding. This will not cover the mechanics of nursing or the frequency and duration of feedings. It does not cover how to get the baby to latch or pumping. This is not the typical talk. Today, we are going to talk about breastfeeding and tell a story about breastfeeding that we might not normally consider. And hopefully, this will be a part of how we talk about breastfeeding going forward. This is not the entire story, but this is my version of the story. So let's start with the basics. So here's a question: true or false? Wet nursing is the practice of only sharing nursing responsibilities with a blood related sister. True or false? And you can type in your answer in the chat or give a thumbs up emoji for true or thumbs down for false. But what do we think? True or false about wet nursing? Okay, got your answers. Okay, let me see. What does it say? False. It is false. Anyone can be a wet nurse. Wet nursing is simply the act of breastfeeding another woman's child. Now, let me bring your awareness to the fact that the entire planet is populated. Some might say overpopulated. Certainly, every pocket of the planet has people. Wet nursing is a practice that all people participated in until the invention of artificial infant milk in the last century. So let me say that another way. All the 19 centuries before, and all the time before time was counted in the Christian era, this is how we did it. Anyone could feed the baby. So what that meant was that babies were not allowed to starve. And there was no stigma attached to feeding your sister's baby or your cousin or your best friend's baby or the babies you were watching because you were on baby watch while others were off foraging or gathering or farming. This was a joy and honor and was the solve for when mommy was unavailable for some reason. And it was just fine. So fine that maybe wet nursing was made popular by the aristocracies of Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries. So think about this. And what do you think? Is true or false? Was wet nursing made popular by the royal families of Europe in the 1300s and 1400s? So get your answers in. Let's see what it says. True. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. So let's talk about it. So we're talking about these 200 years of change in Europe. And to give us some context, during this transition period, we were moving from the Moorish Empire was coming to an end, and the Ottoman Empire was on the rise. So that's the spread of Islam. They experienced plague and sickness and war and religious scandals that resulted in a serious decline in the population, over 50%. And of course, that resulted in a shift in all economic and social constructs. So let's break that down. So this is a time when Europe hit rock bottom. And that collapse is exactly why our story turns to wet nursing. So the Black Death, which you might be familiar with and learned about, called the plague, occurred during the years of 1347 to 1351. So about 4 years roughly. It killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. That's about 25 million people, more than a third of everyone alive. And in some places, entire villages simply ceased to exist. Second, all of this happened while Europe was already at war. England and France fought the Hundred Years' War actually for more than 100 years, from 1337 to 1453. So over a century of on and off fighting over the French crown. And with these two disasters stacked on top of each other, sieges and soldiers, famine, and then plague on top of all of that, France alone lost as much of half of its population. And regions like Normandy reduced by about 3/4 and Paris by 2/3. So there was a lot of death. And so also during this time, there was some changes in the church. There was scandals, quite frankly. There was a moment where there was multiple popes. And so the integrity of the church was falling apart. Feudalism cracked. And so the economic system that they were under could no longer exist because so many peasants and laborers died that those that remained, the survivors, could demand wages and land and freedom. So nothing about everyday life was the same. Everything changed. A new order was coming about. And so now let me bring it back to why we're here. So the takeaway is not the death toll, it's what the death toll did to babies. When a third to a half of Europe has died, every child becomes precious. A family line, a kingdom, a future. It all depends on babies surviving. And this is precisely why wet nursing becomes necessary to reverse the trend of a dwindling population. The crisis of the 1300s and 1400s is in the moment created a different energy for breastfeeding. So feeding stopped being a private choice for women and it became political. So that is what brought us into the moment. And before I fast forward into the 20th century, I would like to know what questions that you have. Any questions about what we've covered so far? Okay, great. So let's move on to the next. And now we are about to start commenting more about what is happening currently, and certainly now in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries here in the Americas. So I'm going to ask Shem Marie to come to the stage, please. And could you read this slide for us?
Of course. Wet nursing has been linked to social class where monarchies, the aristocracy, nobility, or upper classes had their children wet nursed for the benefit of the child's health, and sometimes in the hope of becoming pregnant again quickly. Poor women, especially those who have suffered the stigma of giving birth to an illegitimate child, sometimes had to give their baby up temporarily to a wet nurse or permanently to another family. The woman herself might in turn become a wet nurse to a wealthier family where using part of her wages to pay her own child's wet nurse.
Yes, thank you. Have you heard about this before, Sisham?
Nope.
No, this is new. Good. Yeah, so the families of monarchies have a long tradition of having a Moorish nursemaid that supported the family's goals around child development and family planning. The children of Moorish and or indigenous women were strong and healthy, and which for most translated into the idea that her milk was superior. So having someone else feed your baby will also help a family get pregnant again quickly. Let me just break that down for you as a little bit of science. So when the body is exclusively breastfeeding, meaning every time that the baby is hungry, the baby comes to the breast and gets milk. So the body is never missing a feeding. That keeps ovulation at bay, and the woman's menses don't come back until the baby starts eating somewhere else and the body is not the sole source of food for the baby. And so if someone else is nursing your baby, so the baby's still getting breast milk, which is great, but if your body is not giving that baby breast milk, essentially you will start ovulating again and have a baby. We see this with cats. When they lose their kittens, they go into heat. And so it's the same mechanics. And so in order to build a brood and to rebuild families after a whole bunch of people died, having mommy get pregnant again quickly was the goal. And so having a wet nurse would enable that. So the symbol of breastfeeding moved from the image of the Black Madonna, like we saw on the previous slide, to a Moorish woman nursing maybe a noble child, where the Black Madonna was nursing Jesus. So wet nursing became necessary to reverse the trend of a dwindling population, and it began to be associated with royalty and nobility and having money or being of a higher class. As Moorish rule declined, the rising monarchy continued the tradition of hiring Moorish wet nurses. And this was a tremendous opportunity for poor women to become a lady of the court, so to speak. So this is what was going down around breastfeeding. This is the politics that was happening as things were shifting. The picture on the right we can see is a depiction of a beautiful, buxom, enslaved indigenous woman holding a cute little white chunky baby. And in the caption here, it talks about in the last line, a royal crest may yet upon his diadem wave, and that just means that he's going to wear a crown of royalty. Like that's what that means. And so this is what was being attempted to be recreated after a whole bunch of people were kicked out of Europe, came to this country, picked up some people in Africa, enslaved them, et cetera, et cetera. So let's now go to the last century. So another true false question. Milk nurses are sales girls in nurses' uniforms employed to give nutritional advice and instructions to mothers. True or false? So let me know what you think about this one. Is that true or is that false? Let me see what it says. Ah, this one is true. I'm sure you figured that one out. You sure figured out like where am I going with all of this? And so the alternate title that I have for this slide is Nestle and the sweet shit they sell you. Because those women are not nurses. Those are sales girls in nurses' uniforms. Now, they hired these local women because truly, this would not have worked if sis didn't look just like me, if she did not look like us. Before the substitutes were sophisticated as they ended up, a lot of babies died trying to get the formula right. So, normalizing formula feeding was accomplished via these types of marketing tactics. Some of us actually lived through this. The 1970s had the lowest rates of breastfeeding here in the United States. After figuring out how to get the formula to kill some babies, but not all of them, and get the formulas to be marketed here, they took everything they learned about how to reach people and how to get women to deny their babies their breasts and feed them a formula in a bottle. They used every trick they could perceive of in order to do that. Even exploiting wars and feminist movements to say women want to work and not be beholden to a baby. The formula companies went so far as to sponsor the building of nurseries in hospitals to ensure that there would be a demand for their product. So before they did that, babies stayed in the room with mommy, and there was no need or desire to separate the baby from mommy. In order to create a demand for their product, the formula companies sponsored the building of nurseries in hospitals so that the baby would be separate and that the nurses can now feed the baby. And that's still going on to this day. You can learn more about that from the documentary The Milky Way. So there is way more going on than just getting the baby to the breast. And I do get triggered when I hear people talking badly about themselves or women that don't meet their breastfeeding goals. And so I have my final true or false question for this presentation. True or false? The USA is one of 148 countries that have implemented the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. So, true or false? Where is the US with this? Are we one of the 148 or not? And let's see. The answer is false, of course. I mean, unfortunately, I know where I live. And so here's a map of all of the countries on the planet. And the ones that are shaded in pink and dark pink are the ones that have adopted some legal measures in regards to these marketing codes. The ones in gray have not. There are many ways to participate in this code. Some countries encourage voluntary participation, and some countries actually draft new laws. So, this marketing code aims to protect breastfeeding, to protect all mothers and babies, whether breastfeeding, formula feeding, or combination feeding, and to prevent aggressive marketing practices that often prevent mothers from meeting their own breastfeeding goals. So, infant formula, feeding bottles, and artificial nipples are the main products that fall within the scope of the code. Pacifiers and breast pumps are not under the scope of the code. None of the code, so the code only applies to marketing. Please get that part. It does not affect whether or not the products are sold or used. In 2025, they extended the code to digital marketing, because wasn't around when they created this in 1981. So last year they did update this to include social media influencers and online advertising. Anything that's aimed at parents in the first 1,000 days of the baby's life. So the United States is in Gray, as we can see, is one of 46 countries that don't have any legal measures at all. It's actually the only industrialized nation that has never adopted the code. As of this year, February 2026, about 76% of all of the countries that are part of the WHO member states have enacted legal measures of some sort, covering at least part of the code. And that actually covers about 92% of the world's births. So if you look at the map, everything that you see in pink, all the shades of pink, is covering 92% of the planet of the world's birth. So that is pretty good. The darker shaded countries, and there's 37 of those, the darkest ones, are substantially aligned with the code. So they have laws in place. And then the other, on the flip side of that, the ones in gray, like I said, they don't have any legal measures whatsoever. So this was adopted by the World Health Assembly and UNICEF in 1981. And so I'm raising this because I want us to build an understanding about the marketing. This is why in this country you see formula marketed everywhere. It's super available because they can market it however they want to. In these other countries, you will not see it prominently featured anywhere, nowhere. I think in certain countries you can only find it in a pharmacy, and you got to ask someone because they might have it like behind the counter, or it's at a bottom shelf somewhere. It's not prominently featured anywhere. So there are people, whole countries on the planet that are aware that this substance is dangerous. And so let me say more about that. And so now I just want you to pay attention to these two numbers, the 54% and the 24%. So exclusive breastfeeding rates, we typically say, okay, we look at the first 6 months of life. In the first 6 months of life, if the baby only got breast milk, we call that an exclusively breastfed baby. I'm exclusively breastfed for longer than that. But for the sake of measuring, they usually use 6 months. And so there are two kinds of countries that I'm comparing here. There are the 54%, so that rate exists for the countries that actually put things into law. And then there's the 24% for the countries that have no laws whatsoever. And that's more than double. More than double. So in the first 6 months of a baby's first 1,000 days, the law on the books is the difference between 1 in 4 babies exclusively breastfeeding and more than 1 in 2. That is the difference, whether a law is on the books or not. That is what this data is showing us. And so this should bother you. It certainly bothers me. Why are we not on the 54% side of the chart? Why are we on this 24% side? What is that about? So when we ask why our babies aren't breastfed, when we blame mothers, when we say, oh, Black women just don't breastfeed, I want you to think about this slide, and I want you to share this information with people. Same mothers, same babies, same formula companies, and the same marketing playbook. The only difference is which country the baby is born in, whether that country stood up to the marketers or not. So this is not about mothers making choices. This is about policy. And we know what that means for us in our communities. Black babies in this country have the lowest breastfeeding rates of every single group. Not because our milk is different, and it's certainly not because our mothers care less. It's because we live in the only industrialized nation that voted against this code in 1981 and still have no legal measures in place today. This is actually a law problem dressed up as a lifestyle problem. The good news is that we know how to fix it. Countries that locked the code into law, they moved the needle to a 54% breastfeeding rate for their countries. So every time we're told breastfeeding is a personal choice, remember this. Remember that the choice is being made for us in a boardroom and a legislator long before it's ever made in a delivery room. So the ask today isn't just breastfeed your baby. The ask is protect the mother, and the baby will follow. Laws first, marketing last. Our sisters deserve the same 54% that the rest of the world gets. We fought entirely too hard to be born for less. And so before I move on and we begin to close out this presentation, what questions do you have? See if there are any questions in the chat here. Everyone's rocking with me. Thank you. Okay. So, what are the benefits of breastfeeding? That is a question. That is somewhat of a trick question, too. When we talk about breastfeeding, sometimes we can get really technical, real technical. We can use a lot of science. This picture is meant to be provocative. Let's let you take a moment to look at it. So we see a woman breastfeeding two babies in this picture, one considerably smaller than the other. So first, let me let you know that she did agree to have this picture taken. Start there. What she probably did not agree to was getting her baby hooked on this substance. So let's analyze what we're looking at here. The baby on the right in her left arm is the older child. So what we can see from this picture is how formula feeding caused mommy to get pregnant again quickly. All right, so there's two babies. If she had exclusively breastfed for 6 months, let's say, these children might end up being about, I don't know, you do the math, 9 months plus 6 months, 15 months apart, let's say. So these children are probably anywhere from 10 to 14 months apart. So we see the difference in the sizes of these babies. Now, a corporation did that to the baby on the right in her left arm. Someone said that we going to push formula and convinced her somehow, probably hired someone that looked like her and got her to do something that her mother didn't do. But now she tried this thing. Another entity, probably a nonprofit or NGO of some sort, came along and got her right so that that next baby was on the breast. So this bothers me. I'm actually really incensed by this image because I lived through ads on TV that were designed to convince me that babies in Africa were starving due to famine. And I come to find out that it was us, corporations, American corporations, that were testing out their products in Africa. And so this conversation about the benefits of breastfeeding, I actually have a different take on that. So I'm going to invite Mama Ayo to the stage. Ayo, can you please read the paragraph here from the book, The Bottle, the Breast, and the State by Maureen Rand Oakley?
Yes, I can. The continued return to the benefits language or even talk of reduced risk due to breastfeeding assumes formula feeding as the baseline, even though all the AAP statements have asserted since 1997 that the breastfed infant is the normative standard. If breastfeeding really were the normative standard, then the statements would report the increased risks associated with formula use rather than the decreased risks associated with breastfeeding without even having to think about it. The writer reverts to benefits language when he or she goes into detail, as this language feels the most natural to those researching and writing about the topic because it reflects their actual experience in the United States, where the actual norm and practice is to see an infant with a bottle, not an infant at the breast.
Thank you. Thank you, sis. So Mama Ayo is a doula. And so what do you think about this, Ayo?
Um, it's unfortunately, I mean, hospitals are becoming more baby friendly now to reverse all of this, but yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't a breastfed baby. Even 11 years ago, my son was, they pressure you and introduce you to a bottle before they give you an opportunity to really be at the breast. Even in the hospital, when you request to be exclusive breastfeeding, where you don't want any bottles, anything to deter the baby from having the opportunity to do anything but breastfeed. It's like the minute there's a hiccup, or if it's not going easy at the beginning, it's like they're quick to offer you a bottle.
Yeah.
So that's what that brings up for me, that passage, just
Mm-hmm.
the culture within a hospital
Mm-hmm.
that goes along with, the larger goal in the US.
Yes. Well, thank you. That is exactly what I have witnessed from working in a hospital as to do breastfeeding support. I battled with many nurses that were really ready to give that bottle the minute mommy acted like she was having the slightest difficulty. Like it's a cultural thing that we have to undo. So this book here is really great, has way more information for any aspiring social workers, social justice advocates, food justice advocates, breastfeeding, maternal health advocates. This is a really good resource. And the norm that they're talking about is not seeing babies at the breast, which if you go to other countries, that is the norm. Like you're gonna see that. You're gonna see a mommy breastfeeding, and it's normal. It's normal. She's not as embarrassed as some of the moms I see here that are attempting to make a difference. And so this week is Black Breastfeeding Week. This is when we are recording this on August the 25th, 2026. So shout out to us because we're Black women that breastfeed. August 1st to August 7th is World Breastfeeding Week. And this photo is actually from the subway caravan from many years ago that I participated in. I used to do this every year. And this is one of the things that we do to normalize seeing baby at the breast. Okay, and so it's at the subway caravan. It was about getting all the breastfeeding mommies that we know. Come on, let's get on the train. We're gonna go to City Hall and rally, and then we're gonna go to Restoration Plaza and eat. And we're gonna breastfeed the whole time. We're gonna pull our boobies out on the train and breastfeed our babies and not act like we should be hiding. And so the relationship to breastfeeding, the relationship to the breast, growing up watching it, like this is how we normalize this. But most people in the US grow up or grew up seeing a bottle. Certainly, our media shows babies being fed a bottle. So, normalizing breastfeeding doesn't just happen in language, we have to see it. So, you just can't say, oh, breastfeeding is the norm. You have to see it for that to be true. But what we could do, we could speak from the frame that breastfeeding is the norm and actually discuss and talk about the dangers of formula feeding. That's what we could do. And we don't normally speak on this in this way. This is a taboo subject. I know. Many times it was the woman's mother that was pushing for formula. So this gets hairy and hard. I'm sure my mama didn't breastfeed me because I watched them making bottles for my brother and sister. So I don't remember getting a bottle because maybe I was too young to remember that, right? But I remember my brother and sister getting a bottle. I watched them make that formula bottle. So I'm pretty sure I didn't get no breast milk really like that. The woman that trained me along the journey shared the story about when she asked her mother, though. And Amy was the same age as me. And so here's the story, right? She asked her mama why she didn't breastfeed me. And mom's talked about the doctor. And she said, well, I asked the doctor, and the doctor said, those breasts are not the baby, those breasts belong to your husband. Right. And so that's how she was getting guided and coached by her doctor around breastfeeding. It's so I was so glad when she shared that with me because I would have never really understood what was happening, but I get it now. It was structural, it was cultural, it was patriarchal. So there's way more going on here than breastfeeding versus formula feeding. From hiring sales girls that were probably extremely poor to peddle this garbage, from forcing enslaved indigenous women to breastfeed the children of their enslavers, from having to give up your baby to a wet nurse because the child you birthed was considered illegitimate, to just take your wages to feed a wet nurse. It's just crazy. So here is something that's really tangible. When we hear someone talk about the benefits of breastfeeding, we could just stop them and say there's no such thing. There are absolutely no benefits to breastfeeding because breastfeeding is the norm. That's what we do. There are disbenefits to formula feeding, and we could talk about that because the whole planet is populated. And how do you think everybody got here? Formula is an invention of the last century, and it wasn't always good. Well, none of it is actually good. It's the first yoke of oppression in the baby's life. I remember at the subway caravan, City Hall, there was a man standing at the gate asking, hey, what y'all doing? And we told him what we was doing. And he immediately said, yeah, yes, stop feeding the salt and the sugar to our babies and stop having them hooked on this corporate food mess. And I was like, oh, okay. God, wow. I didn't even expect that. And so exposing babies to this substance increases the child's risk for all sorts of ailments like asthma and allergies, heart disease, anemia. Feeding babies formula may cause them to have a lower IQ and issues with cognitive development. And that baby is also at an increased risk for SIDS, because remember that this is formula, not milk. All of these problems we've been seeing in children in the recent generations, including mine, are directly tied and correlated to formula feeding. And issues, mommy has issues too. She's not exempt, like extra weight, hypertension, diabetes. All that could be reduced significantly with exclusive breastfeeding. During that 6 months, you are burning calories that you gained during pregnancy and converting it to milk. All the milk is water and fat. Mommy needs to lose the weight. Baby needs to gain weight through the milk. It's just perfectly designed. So my encouragement is let's stop talking about the benefits of breastfeeding and start talking about the dangers of formula feeding. And so here is the list of resources that many of the resources that I used to teach the class. I teach about this, and of course with a nice picture. So this I used to use this picture a lot when I worked as a peer counselor at the WIC office. I worked with a lot of families and a lot of fathers too, who really loved the encouragement of free milk. Like I think that was their favorite part that they loved about it. And so you can see from this picture how the formula companies tried to mimic the breast milk with the basics. So there's water, protein, carbs, DHA, fat, vitamins, and minerals. But then there's a whole bunch of things that the breast milk has that is not found in formula. And they can't get it in there. And even the items that they have here, the water, okay, so let's say the water is the same, but the protein, none of the rest of that stuff is the same. It is not as digestible. It's not made from organic material. It's just not the same. And so to close out, how do we end here? What is it that I want you to leave with? So this is what I want you to know. I want you to know that a lot of drama has been created, impoverishment and so-called famine in Africa, families fighting over the cost of artificial milk when they have access to real milk. We really do need to get back to the practice, and we need to get it back right away because it's starting to disappear and it's a learned behavior for our lines and our lineage. And we could just get it back. I heard a story about Katrina where a woman, had a newborn, didn't hadn't established breastfeeding, and so was used to formula feeding and expecting to formula feed and did not know how to get the milk out of her breast into the baby. The baby did not make it. Um, and then she still had to deal with engorged breasts. And that is really sad. She was not by herself. So that meant that no one around her knew how to get the milk out of her body and into the baby. And that is horrible. And we need to be very concerned about that because clearly the entire planet is populated. So this breastfeeding is the norm, obviously, and this is how we continue life. All of our foremothers breastfed, otherwise we would not be here. And we are still discovering qualities and properties of breast milk, like stem cells that are in breast milk and the healing factors of breast milk. And so we can see this as an opportunity to teach, an opportunity to engage in young families, young moms, and give them this vital survival information and bring this practice back for ourselves. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you for being here.